This is a CBS News special report.
United Flight 232 was bound from Denver to Chicago this afternoon when an engine apparently blew up over Iowa.
The explosion knocked out one engine and the plane's hydraulics. No steering, right or left, up or down.
It's almost 100% fatal every time it happens.
Fitch, a flight instructor, was a passenger on the plane and volunteered his services. He wound up controlling the aircraft by adjusting its speed on a harrowing 44-minute descent to Sioux City.
Yeah, what you want now, I'll help you.
I've got 296 lives in my two hands, literally. And it's the most overwhelming feeling I've ever had in my life. And all I had a chance to do is I just looked up and I said, God, help me get this done.
Loss number 2 and some hydraulics. Airplane is emergency controllable here.
Controllers immediately cleared the airspace.
9232 to center maintain, flight level 290. I will be your attention, sir. Stand by.
Seconds later,
Center United, 232, we're declaring an emergency here.
Declaring emergency.
And request landing at the nearest suitable airport.
by that time Haynes knew he was in danger of crashing.
Sir, we need the works, 232. We're just having trouble controlling the airplane right now.
Would you like to go to Sioux City?
Affirmative.
232 was cleared to Sioux City. The plane got over the runway, but just before touchdown, the right wing dropped. Out of 296 aboard, 189 survived.
NBC's Robert Hager has more tonight on this crash investigation.
Investigators feel they know why 185 of those on board managed to escape this inescapable inferno. This is the seating plan of a DC-10. Preliminary information indicates those who were killed were in these seats, almost all of them in the front and in the rear, while those who survived were sitting here, mostly in the center section. Investigators theorize that this first fireball was less lethal than it appeared. A flash fire from aviation fuel sprayed outside the plane. It was brief, and much of the wreckage may have skidded clear of it. Investigators believe the deaths occurred because the front and rear sections disintegrated during the crash, while the center section, its structure made sounder by joints with the wings, remained intact. The cockpit broke off as one piece, also intact, and the pilots survived. Investigators credit the quick arrival of rescue workers on the scene.
His wheels were down, his nose were up, his wings were level. Looked like it was going to be just a fast landing. You know, he'd roll off to the end of the runway to evacuate the aircraft. And I really thought we'd all be home for supper that night. I really didn't think. Of course, it doesn't happen in your town. It doesn't happen to you.
At the end of the runway, it's just a wide open field.
Somewhere around 400 feet above the ground, and we're going so fast, the captain said, pull the power off, meaning let's get rid of some of the speed. And I said, I can't. That's what's holding your wing up.
Left turn. Close the throttle. Close them all. Back turn, close the throttle. Now, I can't pull them off if you lose it. That's what's turning you. Okay, all right.
I looked down at the captain's vertical speed indicator, and I saw it at 1,800 feet per minute, which was intolerable. We couldn't hit that hard. And in a desperate effort, I firewalled both the engines, shoved both the throttles up to full power, and the time factor wasn't there for us.
Okay, there you go. Left throttle. Left.
Everybody saw the airplane on final, and it's like, man, he's going to make it. And I mean, everybody was just stunned when it hit. I mean, we couldn't believe it. It was like slow motion. The plane was probably going 220 knots, and we knew it was going to hit hard. But we expected him to make it. For 30 minutes, I built up inside me this wall, saying all these people are going to die, and all of a sudden they're all going to live. And then think again, suddenly they're all going to die again. And I just felt like my heart had been ripped out.
We just
dropped out of the sky and hit the ground. I mean, it felt like we slammed into the earth. And immediately, I mean, within seconds after the initial impact, I saw flames, I saw smoke, I saw people still strapped in their chairs being thrown around in the cabins, people thrown out of their chairs being thrown around the cabin. And, I mean, within a few seconds, there was a lot of chaos, there was a lot of destruction, and there was probably some death immediately upon that impact.
I saw the corn stalks going by Captain Haynes' window, and the strangest thought crossed my mind is, my God, they really do grow up that tall in Iowa. And of course, the bad news was that a normal DC-10 captain sits 22 feet in the air, and I know they didn't grow it that tall. So I knew that something bad had probably happened to our undercarriage or our landing gear. I remember tearing of metal. I remember now very loud shrieking engine noise.
Noises that you've never heard before and you hope you never hear again. It was horrendous. These strange shrieking noises.
And we went straight ahead for a period of time, and then we veered to the right into a soybean field. And it's almost as if somebody had kicked you from behind, and you could feel your whole body went forward as if you were going over the top.
When we started to go over, I was like, I don't want to do this. I know this airplane is starting to roll.
I felt heat, humidity, and debris, and after that it was just one of the most, I can't begin to describe in words how violent it was after that.
I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't feel anything, I couldn't smell anything. Nothing was working except my mind. It was like total body detachment or being in a protective cocoon. I then realized that 2/3 of me was suspended in fire, and I felt this is it. This is how I'm going to go. This is how I'm going to die. And it was the most incredibly peaceful moment I've ever known. That I was in no pain. I had no anymore. It was total peace.
Get to the plane crash. Get to the plane crash.
I'll never forget the first survivor I saw was this little kid, maybe 10, 12 years old. And then there was this woman wearing a dress, and they were both kind of laying on the field, and then they set up. They'd been tossed out of the aircraft, and they set up, and they got up, and they started walking to me. And my first reaction was, didn't somebody tell these people that this airplane was going to crash? I thought these were people out here on the airfield for some kind of a field day or a field trip or something. Because as you watched the airplane crash, you couldn't imagine that anybody lived from that crash. So I thought these people were hit by debris. I couldn't believe it. And then behind them, more people began to set up, and then the reality set in that, yeah, these are people from the aircraft that are actually survived this event, you know, and most of them in need of medical care. But still, to this day, it's amazing that anybody survived that crash.
There's lots of people running around out here. We're not sure how many passengers as of yet were on the plane.
Many wonder why they survived when others weren't so lucky.
I was a young single woman. I had no children. And I felt really guilty. Why me and not them?
You cannot possibly understand the guilt of survival. You say, boy, you were lucky. You're lucky to get out of that. That doesn't work.
It's quite painful because you want to trade your life for that 9-year-old you know died.
Survivors often suffer years of painful trauma trying to cope.
I went crazy. I was scared of everything. I felt like I was losing my mind.
It's as if the event is haunting you. You don't want to be thinking about it. You certainly don't want to be dwelling on it. Well-minded people will say, oh, just forget about it. It's over. But that's the whole point. This is part of the nature of the disorder.
The people you are about to meet have all survived plane crashes, and their stories show that recovery from a crash is possible and can fundamentally change your life for the better.
Going through something like this turned into a blessing. It gives you an appreciation of life that you would have never had, having not had this experience.
All of us, to a person, can say one thing, that we're living better than we ever did the day before that accident.
Being in the plane crash saved my life because I feel like I had a second chance at life.
July 1989. A United Airlines DC-10 crash lands at Sioux City Airport. It disintegrates on impact. 111 die, while 185 survive. The flight took off from Denver and was heading for Chicago. The captain at the controls that day was Al Haynes.
We'd been flying about an hour. They'd served us our lunch, and we were just about over, just north of Sioux City, Iowa. And all of a sudden, this big explosion took place. It came as a complete shock. There was no warning whatsoever. I thought a bomb had gone off. It was very, very loud.
Jan Murray Moore was a flight attendant in the first-class cabin.
It was very obvious that something was terribly wrong. It was just, the plane was shaking after the explosion. You know, we started to porpoise in the sky. The noises were just incredible. I mean, it was obvious that we were in really, really bad trouble.
A freak mechanical failure caused the loss of the plane's entire hydraulic system, crucial to the steering of the aircraft. The pilots were left with almost no working controls. By sheer luck, a senior DC-10 training pilot was a passenger on board.
Denny Fitch was riding in first class, and I was working in first class. And so I went to him, and I kneeled down very quietly, and I told him, I said, we've lost all hydraulics.
And so I said, would you go back up front, ask the captain if there's anything I can do to assist him. I'm a DC-10 training check airman.
Well, of course, as soon as we heard he was back there, he's an instructor. He's very familiar with all the procedures and all that. Get him up here right now.
I went up to do the throttles, and right before I touched the throttles, I simply said, God, help me get this done.
Denny now felt the enormous weight of responsibility for the people on board.
I got positioned to fly it, and I put my hands back on the two remaining throttles that we were using, and I really felt the shock go through me, and it became abundantly clear to me then that dear God, I have 296 lives in my two hands.
The DC-10 was rising and falling in the sky, while the pilots struggled to keep it level. Al and Denny knew they had to make an emergency landing, and the nearest airport was Sioux City.
United 232, Sioux City. We have no hydraulic fluid, which means we have no elevator control, almost done, and very little aileron control. I have serious doubts about making the airport.
One of the questions people ask me is, why do you go to Sioux City? And I honestly said, that's where the airplane went. And we just kept it flying till it got there.
No one had ever successfully landed a passenger plane without hydraulics before, but Al and Denny had no time to worry about that.
You know, if we'd gone off on that tangent about well, people are going to die, we're going to lose people, we might have panicked. And we couldn't afford to do that. You can't think about crashing, you have to think about surviving.
There was no more fear. It was that all positive attitude. We were going to get it done. We were going to land it. Somehow we were going to make this happen. I didn't think it was going to be pretty, but I thought it would be survivable.
I don't know how many minutes it was that we were screaming, brace, brace, keep your heads down, keep your heads down, but that was a very, very long period of time. There were lots of tears, and there were lots of prayers, but there was no panic.
The DC-10 was descending towards Sioux City Airport at over twice the safe landing speed.
We're going way too fast, so we have no brakes. How are we going to stop?
On the ground, hundreds of firemen and emergency vehicles were ready to respond once the crippled airplane touched down. On board the plane, fear was palpable.
It was the most frightened I have ever been in my entire life.
Very hard. It was rapid, it was fast, it was violent.
We started to flip backwards, and the force was just amazing. And it was dirt and smoke, and There was a fireball that came through the cabin.
I can't begin to put into words what the sounds of the middle, the tearing, the acceleration loads. Like a pencil, we just snapped off and the cockpit became a 200-mile-an-hour ball rolling. And the rest of the fuselage went on its back and slid into a cornfield on fire with people in it.
We came to a stop, and there was a little hole of light, probably about that big. And I can remember crawling for it and actually came to an opening. We stepped out and into that beautiful blue Iowa sky. And I thought I was in heaven.
Miraculously, 185 people on board survived the crash. Al Haynes had lost consciousness, and when he awoke in the hospital, he had no idea of what he had been through.
TV came on, and here's a picture of the airplane approaching the runway and hitting the runway. And I asked my wife who that was. It was a terrible crash. Who was that? And she said, it was you. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe anybody survived that crash.
There was this terrible sounds, tearing of metal, G-loads. There's yaw to the right. Simultaneous with that change of direction was this sensation that something was like drop kicking your backside. You could feel yourself coming up and over, head over heels. We ended up in 4 distinct pieces. We landed with the right wing down. The wing ruptured open, and 11,000 pounds of kerosene came out and started on fire.
The wing that dipped on landing, that was the wing that was always going down?
The right wing, yeah. The damn thing always wanted to go down. The engine itself was totally demolished by the impact because it smashed into the ground once the gear fell. The tail broke off and tumbled down the runway at 200 plus miles an hour with people in it. The airplane was in a cartwheeling motion because the engine on the left wing is now running at maximum power. Like a pinwheel, it's just causing the airplane to rotate because the engine's pushing it around. When the tail broke off, the airplane is much heavier forward, so the airplane is now coming up in the air like a seesaw that somebody got off. The cockpit is getting pointed straight to the earth, and we skipped like a pogo stick. The first skip, when I saw the windshield go dark brown and green and I still felt the air conditioning, we were still integral to the aircraft. The stress caused the cockpit to break off like a pencil tip. The main wreckage slammed on its back and slid into a cornfield across an active runway, burning there. Debris everywhere. What seemed like an eternity was in fact 30 minutes before we were found. Our engineer, Dudley DeVork, was able to get his hand up through some wreckage, and somehow he drew attention to somebody driving by. The guy said, "What is this?" "It's the cockpit. There's 4 of us in here." The Air National Guard brought a forklift truck with chains and tried to lift it so that the fire rescue people could climb underneath and cut us out of our seats and get us out of there. The cockpit had become so dismembered that it was basically a pile of trash. Whenever they lifted us with chains, it compacted us in tighter. We'd scream in pain because it just made it worse, so they put you back down and then try to rearrange chains. I felt a hand just tap me on the chest. "Don't worry, buddy, I've got you. You're going to be fine. We got you." And salvation.